He who fights with monsters should be careful, lest he thereby become a monster. And if thou gaze long into the abyss will also gaze into thee. This is a famous quote from Friedrich Nietzsche's 1886 book, Beyond Good and Evil. And it's a quote that, despite being written over a century ago, is still relevant even today. The moral corruption of a character is something that has existed throughout the history of storytelling. Whether it's the gradual decay, ideological ambition, a temptation of power, some corrosive form of pragmatism, or grief-driven despair, these stories captivate us. But why? Why do corrupted characters fascinate us so much? And how? How do we write them better? Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Wrestling with Words podcast. My name is Cameron. I'm a writer, an editor, and your host. Here, we talk about all things related to writing and storytelling. And the goal is to help you tell better stories while also understanding how the best stories are told. Corruption arcs often blur right and wrong, reflecting real moral ambiguity. This nuance provokes thought and makes the story unpredictable and thematically resonate with the audience. These characters are often rooted in tragedy, delivering powerful emotional payoffs. We witness the high cost of hubris and choice, power and ambition, justice and revenge. And corrupted characters give us added depth and narrative stakes when hidden flaws or needs are revealed. When grounded in a relatable flaw, the descent feels earned. The conflict between a character's original integrity and their tempting goal creates intense internal drama. But more importantly, many of these characters act as cautionary tales. We see this in the Lord of the Rings, Dune, and Breaking Bad, stories that show us that corruption has a cost to the individual as well as the ones around them. A well-crafted corruption arc has the feeling of inevitability. Each compromise draws the character deeper, making the climax both revelatory and tragic. These characters have existed since we first started telling stories, but that won't change. But understanding what makes them compelling is what separates the ones that haunt us, even to today, from the ones that are forgotten. What is a corrupted character? George R. R. Martin is well known for saying that nobody is a villain in their own story. We're all the heroes of our own stories. The corrupted character might be a protagonist who undergoes a legitimate corruption arc, like Daenerys Targaryen from A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones, which we will talk about. I don't know what the current state or feeling is around the final season, but I don't think it's improved all that much, and I know my own feelings haven't necessarily changed. Or the corrupted character might be an anti-hero, like Cassian from Andor, where he goes from being a good-hearted rebel to someone who commits strategic violence, covering up atrocities for his cause. And the corrupted character might also be a villain who has a tragic backstory, the corruption being their present state in the narrative. We see this in many of the bosses within Elden Ring's lore, and we see it in a character like Glokta from Joe Abercrombie's The First Law Trilogy, a man whose corruption is already complete when we first meet him. Regardless of where a corrupted character comes from, the primary thing we need to understand is the four pillars that every corrupted character shares, which makes this both an archetype that is both compelling and narratively satisfying. The first and most obvious thing to consider is what type of arc we want the character to go through. However, this can often be the first misstep or the first problem that can occur when writing these kinds of characters. Trying to follow a traditional character arc can sometimes make a character feel unoriginal and even forced, removing agency and making them feel formulaic as opposed to dynamic. Take Daenerys Targaryen in A Game of Thrones Season 8. On paper, her arc looks like it hits all of the traditional corruption arc beats. She understands and rejects the thematic truth, is tempted by and embraces the lie, and has a tragic ending. But the main issue was that Daenerys really lacked agency. It felt like we were just kind of ticking boxes, fulfilling a predetermined script. Instead of thinking of the arc as a traditional character arc, I want to suggest a different sort of framing. What I am talking about are 4 specific types of arcs a corrupted character can go through: gradual, external, ideological, and traumatic or temptation. The gradual arc is a step-by-step erosion of morality or principles, where each decision feels justified in the moment, or at least understood, but erodes their moral framework over time. We see this with Rin in the Poppy Wars. Each compromise she makes feels survivable in isolation until the cumulative weight of them becomes irreversible. For the external arc, this is corruption driven by a system, environment, or a force beyond the character's control. Cassian in Andor is a good example. His corruption isn't a single choice, but the slow result of living inside a system that demands moral compromise as the price of resistance. Vampire the Masquerade takes this even further, building the corruption directly into the world's architecture. The system itself is built upon a corrupting force. The ideological arc is one of the more complex ones. This is a corruption of belief. The ideology is coherent but flawed, and the character becomes more consistent in it over time, not necessarily less. Paul Atreides in Dune is one of the clearest examples of this. He sees where his path leads, understands it will produce fanaticism and a holy war, and steps towards it anyways, because he believes it is his destiny, and that justifies the cost. Brau Cormiant in The Traitor, Brau Cormiant, operates similarly. Her ideology is a tool she picks up consciously, and the corruption is in how completely she is eventually consumed by it. And finally, one of the more common arcs is in the trauma or temptation arc, an internal arc where the character is pulled towards corruption because of pain, fear, grief, or even desire. In this case, the corrupting force feels like relief or even survival, or even maybe a cry for help. Walker in Spec Ops: The Line begins here. The trauma of what he witnesses and causes becomes the engine that drives every subsequent justification. Ellie in The Last of Us Part II is another clear example. Her catalyst is grief, and the arc is about how far grief can hollow a person out before there is nothing recognizable left. It is a recognition of the cycles of violence caused by the temptation of vengeance. The next pillar, the catalyst, has to do more with a single moment, event, or action, as opposed to the broader arc that we just mentioned. The most common catalyst mistakes is making this moment so devastating that it removes the character's agency. And without agency, there is no personal responsibility. And without their personal responsibility, there is no thematic tragedy to this corruption. Every corrupted character had something happen that leads them down their path. Something makes them vulnerable, desperate, angry, proud, afraid, or hungry for control. That incident doesn't complete the corruption, but instead it gives the character a reason to start moving in the direction of their arc, whether it be gradual, external, ideological, or from trauma or temptation. The catalyst should feel emotionally or mentally significant. It should expose a weakness the character already had and creates the first believable crack in their moral foundation. Walker's catalyst is the white phosphorus decision, notable because it functions simultaneously as the catalyst and the point of no return in the game. There's no moment before it and after it where Walker is the same person. Rin's catalyst, on the other hand, is the fall of Seingard and the genocide of her people. It is enormous, undeniable, and exposes a capacity for rage that was always there waiting. Brau's catalyst is political rather than personal, the loss of her homeland's sovereignty to an empire. What's distinctive is that her response is not grief, but the start of her strategizing, which tells us something important about who she already was, and later who she becomes, before the corruption even began. Paul Atreides' catalyst is perhaps the most unusual on this list. It is his prescience. He witnesses his own corruption before it happens and chooses to walk towards it anyways. The catalyst is not something done to him. It is something he consents to in the form of prophecy, which in some ways is more disturbing than the others. But the next logical conclusion to the catalyst is our next pillar worth discussing, the moral shift. Where most writing collapses or is most noticeable on the page is usually occurring here. Or rather, its absence can often be the most noticeable. I see time and time again that the internal logic of a character's corruption is never made legible to the audience. We don't want to be overly vague. The moral shift should be clear, either thematically or as a part of the character in escalating stakes. The moral shift is the core of the corruption. This is where the character begins redefining right and wrong to justify what they are doing or intend on doing. This is where we get the ends justify the means, you gotta crack a few eggs, or absolute power corrupts absolutely sentiments. The character's inner logic changes and the lie becomes emotionally persuasive, at least to this character. Self-justification becomes a cornerstone of their hardened position. For Brow, in Brow Cormant, she narrates her own justifications in real time, making her internal logic completely legible to the reader, even as it becomes increasingly monstrous. Rin's shift from vengeance to an ideological position, she stops fighting for something and starts fighting against everything. The shift is gradual enough that she doesn't really notice it, but the reader does. In Spec Ops, Walker doesn't recognize his own corruption, which is precisely the point. His moral shift is visible to the player, but completely invisible to him. He reframes every atrocity as mission critical, as necessary, as someone else's fault. The game makes the audience complicit in that reframing. The lead writer of the game, Walt Williams of Spec Ops: The Line, describes how the team tracked Walker's descent through the smallest possible unit of behavior, something subtle that slowly changed over time. The writers gradually changed how Walker calls out a kill. At the start of the game, he says something like target down. In the middle, he says he's done. But by the end, it's something far uglier. These sort of three words showed that entire moral shift. The smallest use of words that say the most over this entire arc. And even in The Lord of the Rings, for Gollum, it is worth noting here that the moral shift is literalized. His fractured self is two versions of the same character in open conflict. The before and after corruption made visible simultaneously. The ring's power and temptation are clearly stated through Gollum's appearance, actions, and character. It's this pillar, however, where I've seen writers get a bit lost, or rather they skip some steps here. The moral shift is a key part of the character's arc and journey, and this change has to be congruent with the narrative and the core of this character. Usually the writer skips the moral argument the story is wrestling with and instead does a big 180, disregarding the past behaviors of the character for the sake of the plot or for adding some kind of last minute twist or even a revelation. And most of the time, the issue isn't that the character becomes worse. It's that the audience never sees how that change becomes reasonable to them. The behavior shifts, but the belief system doesn't. A real moral shift isn't a single moment. It's a philosophical or moral foundation that breaks down one bad justification at a time. And finally, we arrive at the payoff, the culmination of all of these other pillars, but also a contributing factor to the corrupted character. However, there is a risk of the payoff being flat, streamlined, and deeply unsatisfying. If this message, the one the audience is supposed to take away from the corrupted character's arc and moral shift, becomes too heavy-handed or is beaten over the audience's head, it can come off as preachy at best, or a weak straw man position at worst. The payoff is the consequences of all of the moral bankruptcy: tragedy, downfall, victory with a cost, or irreversible transformations. A good payoff doesn't just end the story. Instead, it delivers a reveal related to what the character's moral shift was and whether it was worth it or not. The ending should feel like the logical result of earlier choices, and the character's final state should reflect the full weight of the arc. Even if they win, the win should be spiritually or morally compromised. Walker's payoff implicates the player directly. The game's ending doesn't just punish Walker, it punishes you, the player, for following him, for even playing the game, which in terms of video games is one of the craziest twists I think I've ever played. For Rin, she wins and it is spiritually uninhabitable. She achieves everything she set out to achieve, and there is nothing left of the person who she wanted to be. Brow's payoff recontextualizes everything that came before it. The tragedy is not that she failed, it's more that she succeeded. In Dune, Paul Atreides achieves everything and becomes the precise monster he warned against. His payoff is more prophetic in the most complete sense. The victory and corruption are sort of the same thing here. He commits mass genocide and fulfilled the warning the series theme tackled. Do not trust charismatic leaders. Glocta functions differently here. He is the payoff without the arc. We meet him already complete, already hollowed out, already on the other side of every choice he's ever made. He is what the other characters on the list are moving towards, except made visible from the start. In another book, Red Rising, Darrow is an open-ended payoff. The arc is unresolved sort of by design. And that irresolution is its own argument. The threat of corruption is the tension that keeps the trilogy, or at least the original trilogy, moving from book to book. There is constant tension that he will become like the Golds, whom he is actively trying to destroy. Darrow, in some ways, is a reminder that sometimes the most honest thing a story can do is refuse to answer the question or use the threat of corruption to create narrative tension. And for Frodo and Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, it works as a thematic payoff. Gollum's ending is what Frodo could have been. The whole journey is Frodo resisting the arc this video is describing, and Gollum is the proof of what losing that resistance looks like. K.M. Weiland gives some really great insight on corrupted characters, or characters that might have fallen from grace. She states that characters don't just fall, they choose to fall. Although they don't generally think of it like that, whether driven by fear, pride, or desire, they trade their integrity for a lie. Believing it will give them what they want. The cost is an ever-descending descent into self-destruction and often self-righteousness. She gives a really insightful look at why characters fall and how that becomes a thematically compelling component within a story. And to add to that direction, when it comes to writing or understanding corrupted characters, these four pillars should be taken into consideration as well. We can look at a character's arc, whether it be gradual, external, ideological, or a result of trauma or temptation. This will give us a good frame and the avenue to pinpoint the next pillar, the catalyst. After we've understood the arc and the central catalyst for the corruption, the moral shift becomes clear and thematic, leading to a satisfying payoff, the final pillar. There is one common theme for all these examples. Something gets broken. And the question for you is, what do you think that is? Walker had a mission and a sense of heroic identity. Rin had a justifiable reason to fight. Brow had a homeland and a love worth protecting. And Paul had a choice. But all these characters lost something. They lost something that they initially started with. Every one of these characters loses their sense of self. Walker loses his self-identity as a hero. Rin loses the person she was fighting to protect. Brow loses the self she was sacrificing everything to preserve. Paul loses the version of himself that could have chosen differently. These four pillars are supporting one thing that will be destroyed, or at least fundamentally challenged over the course of the story that's being written. That thing is the character's own identity. But I'm curious what you think about corrupted characters and these pillars. Is this something that you've considered, or do you have your own way of writing and thinking about corrupted characters? As always, thank you to the subscribers and the channel members and the supporters over on the Substack. Let me know what you're wrestling with, and as always, I'll see you next time.